years. I touched on that yesterday. Second, there was lots of business investment that much of business investment over the past 8 or 10 years must have been accelerated, must have been taken ahead of schedule to take advantage of the extraordinarily plentiful credit conditions prevailing between 2003 and 2007. So there's not the normal backlog of investment plans. Now I've talked about a depressed level of investment activity. Of course, another way to describe that is to say that there is a depression in the demand prices for business assets, not the supply prices. Supply prices for business assets might even be up a bit, but I don't want to go into that. Now, the central point here, why am I talking about business assets? I thought we were talking about exchange rates. But the point is that investment activities are mostly take place in the non-tradable sector in the U.S. and the UK and every other country that I have any knowledge of. And so, as a result, the decline in the real prices of business assets is synonymous with a decline in the relative prices of non-tradables in the U.S. and the UK and the other countries I mentioned. And that's synonymous with a weakening of real exchange rates in the U.S. and the UK and the others. So, and of course, another corollary is that share prices in the U.S. and the UK will be depressed relatively to those in Asia and Latin America. Now, all that is pretty obvious. The next point to tackle is, will these exchange rates, these real exchange rates in the U.S. and the UK and the others, be weakening further as we go through the decade, or will they be recovering? In other words, for all of you who have studied calculus, what's the first derivative? Is it positive or negative? Here we need a little bit of theory. Economists in their theories like to invoke the idea that in people's minds there's one model of the global economy that's in use. Everybody uses it. You don't know what it is, you just tune in to CNBC and you pick it up. The economists then argue that in terms of this model, the expected rate of return must be comparable in the U.S., and UK too, to the expected rate of return overseas, after allowing for expected real exchange rate appreciation. This leads me to the conclusion that the fall of the real exchange rate in the U.S. and the UK that I was just talking about a moment ago must overshoot, to use Rudy Dornbusch's term, in order that the dollar and the pound can then be expected to be rising, recovering over the decade. That then only then will the rates of return, taking account of the expected real exchange appreciation, be comparable, so that investors don't want to be all in the U.S. and the UK or all in the rest of the world. Now, in practice, and that's probably why we're here this afternoon, in practice, markets have to find the bottom. How low is that dollar exchange rate? from which people will expect a gradual recovery. Markets have to find the bottom and may fall short of what the correct bottom is, theoretically, or they may go too far and have to quickly retrace their steps. And why are there these market failures, so to speak? Well, those are traceable to a diversity of theoretical perspectives out there in the marketplace. We don't all have the same model. I've never met an economist yet who thinks the same as I do about everything. And there are other sources of differences of opinion. In addition, as the chairman of the session was mentioning, and I think Nouriel Roubini too, some countries may try to resist and may succeed in resisting an appreciation of their currencies against the drop of the dollar. Resist the appreciation of the dollar resist the depreciation of their currencies implied by the appreciation of the dollar. And the United States authorities also may resist the, so to speak, free market solution of a precipitous drop of the dollar, which would occur under idealized conditions. And then there's yet a fourth qualification, if I'm counted right. The dollar is obviously vulnerable to unpredictable changes in the willingness of central banks to hold the dollar for reserve asset purposes. Of course, banks can and do sometimes shift out of dollars into gold. There is an alternative to the dollar. There is gold. The euro doesn't present an alternative, and the other currencies are probably too small to provide much of an alternative. But gold is showing an alternative. Let me just wind up with a postscript. I can't resist the aside that this deep drop in the real exchange rates in the U.S. and the U.K. that I'm implying is unlikely to be enough to propel the U.S. and the U.K. back to the old normal level of employment, contrary to years and years of teaching by Milton Friedman, who used to teach, as some of you know, that with flexible exchange rates, it's wonderful you always go back to full employment through exports and imports. So it doesn't matter if the bottom drops out of domestic investment demand. Net foreign investment demand will take its place. The reason that that's wrong is that the phenomenon that I'm discussing here, the real exchange rate depreciation, that initial drop, reflects a decline in the real prices willingly paid for business assets in the U.S. and the U.K. In other words, there's a structural shift going on here. We're not talking about money. And this must lead to a contraction in the annual rate of investment goods willingly supplied by the investment goods industries. The economy must go down those supply curves of the investment goods industries. That means accompanying the lower real price of investment goods is a lower level of production per annum. So, this is a drag on the recovery. The weakness of the dollar is not a piece of good news in an otherwise, is not a silver lining in an otherwise dark cloud. It's integral to the story of depression in the United States. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And now, I think Professor Taleb will say a few words about volatility, about risks, and mostly risk perception.
Mostly fragility. I don't have good things to say. Let's say I measure my time by unit time. Unit time is the time spent between two Troika Dialog meetings, right? So the last unit time, I was here in Moscow, same celebration, same Goon party. I had something to say, that we had fragility in the system, that we had pilots of the plane we were all in who were incompetent, that you have close to about 1 million people on a planet who call themselves vaguely economists, whether the 30,000 PhDs in the States or people employed by this, by that, or people on CNBC who talk about the economy. And aside from a few exceptions, like my friend Nouriel, few people saw what was happening. Few people saw that plane, okay, I'll have a pilot, right? Or the pilot was incompetent. So, what was the problem? It was fragility coming from that huge amount of debt that doesn't allow you to make mistakes. Debt forces you to be very accurate on your predictions. And when I finished the Black Swan, I argued with anybody who would listen to me, even, in elevators, anybody who would listen to me, that any forecast you see in economic life is plain nonsense. Because the forecast error is so huge you can't rely on it. It increases your confidence without giving you precision. So here we had a huge expert error problem, a huge plane, a lot of debt, a lot of hidden risks in the system coming from a debt to GDP that was between 3 and 5 times what we had in 1980, plus derivatives we still don't understand, okay, plus other risks in the system. So that was what I had to say last year. The only solution was reduction of debt by transforming debt into equity, taking the hard pill, as Churchill would say, blood, sweat, and tears. Let's cut down the level of debt by forced conversion. Let's take the pain. That was what I was saying last year coming in. Now, zoom out 1 unit of Troika time, which is between two, conferences. Here we are. Number one, look at the Obama administration. They are transforming private debt between two adults who made a mistake into a public debt for our children. This is a pillage of the future. A pillage of our children. We're relying more on expert mistakes than ever before. Obama just issued projections, okay? So you have forecast of projection, and they never got it right. They never got it anywhere close to anything acceptably right in the past. So they're going to have an error in the projection, hence actual deficit, possibly, okay? It can be very rosy, but that would be my black swan. What I expect is their error to go one way, more deficit, okay? And here you have expert error relies, instead of having society less on expert error, we have society relying more on expert error. Look at who's around Obama. Mr. Bernanke, who got reappointed. It's as if every time someone crashes a plane, you give him a bigger plane. He didn't see the main thing, which is that we had hidden risk in the system. Geithner, for all my respect for you who like Geithner, I would not let him drive a car. I wouldn't let anybody nearby if he drove a car, okay? Just to give you an example, the guy had 2 mortgages on his house 100 yards from mine. Someone who doesn't understand, okay, risk, okay, should not be there. And number 3, Larry Summers. Again, if you want to understand the history of expert error mistakes, look at his career. So here we have a severe problem, largely in the United States, but also in the rest of the world.